Welcome to Keto Life Support, where we make your keto life sustainable, fun, and low stress. I'm Kim Howerton, and I'll be coming to you weekly with some of my keto besties to bring you the practical, real-world keto advice that you need. Quick disclaimer, I am not a doctor, and even if we do have a doctor in the house from time to time, he or she is not your doctor, and nothing we say on this show should be taken as medical advice. Always check in with a trusted medical professional about your own personal medical concerns.
Hello, this is Kim Howerton. Welcome to Keto Life Support. This is episode number 89, and on this episode, I talked to my good friend, Tyler Cartwright. You may have heard of Tyler. He is the co-founder of KetoGains and LMNT, electrolyte company, both excellent resources in the world. And we've been friends for a while. We met in the keto community. In fact, there was some drama when we first met, and I did not particularly care for him. But I later found out that that was based on a lot of misunderstandings and assumptions about what he was thinking that were entirely untrue. So we eventually became friends because that's what you do when you're a grown-up. You don't hide, or at least not for as long as I tried to. You get to know people and you learn that your judgments are probably misplaced. That was my experience. So we get into that a little bit in this episode. We talk very candidly. I share some things that, are thoughts in my head that aren't always the prettiest thoughts to have, but I want to be real with you guys and I want to expose real conversations and real thoughts, and that's what we're here for. So while Tyler and I agree on many things, we disagree on other things, and that's what keeps these conversations interesting. So if you're somebody who hears, of Tyler or KetoGains or, different perspectives on keto, and you immediately think, well, I don't want to listen to this episode because he doesn't agree with everything I think that might be a reason to, in fact, listen to this episode more than another one, because it's good to have our thoughts challenged. It's good to have our perspectives questioned, and it's good to get new information sometimes. So I hope you enjoy this episode where I think more than anything else, you'll hear, though we don't agree on everything, we do agree on the most important thing, which is that we feel very strongly that we're here on this earth to help other people with their struggles that look like our struggles, and that we're in it together. So I hope you enjoy.
Hey, welcome to the podcast. It's super awesome to have my friend Tyler Cartwright. Say hey, Tyler.
Hello.
Hello. What do you want the people to know about you?
I used to be really, really big and really, really sick. Then I lost 300 pounds and created a company with Luis Villaseñor. And let's see, 3,250 clients and 723,000 pounds, give or take, later. We are, now it should be very clear that's not all from 3,000 clients. That would be insane. That is our general community as well. But it's been a absolute whirlwind the last 6 years or so. Then we launched an electrolyte product called LMNT that is really tasty in coffee and water and just about anything else you want to throw it in of the adult beverage variety as well. And now we're trying to bring low carb foods to Mexico. So go figure.
Awesome. You and I have an interesting history, although I think it was more on my side than your side, which is once upon a time back in the day, you might be like, I don't remember any of this. I was sort of part of, you're like, oh God, part of like a community of ketoers that, there's a lot of division within the keto community, I'll say. Shocking, I know. And one of the things that had happened was I was within a group that sort of ended up getting framed as sort of oppositional in terms of like the KetoGains approach, right? And I was sort of friendly and camped in this group that were not so affectionately referred to maybe as butter chuggers or something along those lines. Or anyway, there was a bit of a, I promise this gets better. There was a bit of a, I'm a little bit of a loyalist, I had some feelings towards what wasn't you, but was represented essentially because they were some members of the community.
Not anymore.
That were, I'm not going to name names, but there was a little bit of drama at one point. And I remember going to a conference where you guys were there, and I happened to talk to Rob Wolf. This was before Element was started.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I want to mend this rift.
Mm-hmm.
I want to have a relationship that includes rather than excludes, and an approach that includes rather than excludes. And he was like, go talk to them. They're, nice people. And so I was like, well, that seems much too simple. But eventually we did start having conversations.
Have my people get a hold of your people. And
Totally. So we eventually started talking and actually became, what I consider friends. And
I agree.
And so that's a long way of saying that ultimately I'm really happy with the fact that I made a conscious decision to include rather than exclude across the board within the community of people, anyone who's trying to improve people's health, period. And I think it's important. And I just wanted to say this because there are going to be some people, I will stop talking eventually, listening to this podcast who are like maybe still in the mindset where I came from, which was, if you're not for us, you're against us, right? If you don't have the same approach, if you ever say something I disagree with, then we can't be friends, and then you're the enemy.
So I have a weird belief that my beliefs don't define my humanity. And because of that, it's really fun to hold debate and discourse and compare science and have conversations about things. I think that it's endemic in tribes in general, of people, that you get very siloistic in thinking, and people sort of conflate their dietary identity or their lifestyle identity or whatever to their humanity and their worth as a person. And so you start to see names attached, like plant-based Sally or whatever. Like, you start to see these sorts of things that happen. And I'm not saying they're necessarily bad, right? Like they're not. But when that happens and then you have a conversation where you disagree, it is not us debating science or debating fact. It is us debating religious ideology or individual worth, if I can go maybe a different direction there. It starts to become very, very, I hate this term because I feel it's very co-optive, but tribalistic in the way that we see. And I think that the keto community is guilty of it. Hell, the paleo community is guilty of it. The vegan community is guilty of it. The vegetarian communities, carnivore is now getting large enough that it's sort of splintering as well. So I start to see this thing happening over and over and over in groups of people. And to be honest, it kind of breaks my heart because I'm just here to debate science and try and see if we can reason to the right approach and then apply logic to the individual and say, hey, what works for this person may not be 100% the right approach scientifically, but if they sustain it, it's kind of like the expression, the best exercise is the one you'll keep doing. It's kind of the same sort of idea with respect to any diet that reduces caloric intake, improves, biomarkers of metabolic health, and gets people feeling good enough to go have the conversations they've been avoiding or go live the life that they've been hiding from. So, from my perspective, I never really had a lot of animosity. To be honest, I got really tired of getting clubbed over the head pretty regularly with stuff, but I love debate and I love discussion, and, you and I hold very different positions on some things, and, I've probably trended your direction. I think you've trended mine a little bit over time. And I think that's what good science usually does, is if it doesn't outright prove one person right and the other wrong, you sort of find the middle ground and you sort of agree to look for commonality. It's a kind of rabbinical thing to do. And this is a mistake. We have two talkers on one podcast. We're going to go but
7 hours later.
I think my record is 4.5 hours with Dr. Stan Rich on his dental podcast.
It's interesting because I think I was talking with a mutual friend of ours who used to be one of your admins actually earlier today. There had been a discussion about, this one isn't bad, Layne Norton. Layne Norton had said something, and I agreed with what he was saying underneath the thing he was saying.
So Layne is a friend, which might shock a whole lot of the keto community. I have found, honestly, he's a little brash at times, I think, and he tends to like to poke the bear with a stick. But I also think that I've seen some of the instant messages and some of the commentary from the keto community towards him, and I kind of understand why he bristles pretty quick. But I will say this, I think that Layne's intention and his heart are good. And if you want proof of that, look at the discussion that he had with a nutritionist talking about how to approach sort of the healthy at any size, how to approach the fat acceptance communities in a way that meets people where they are, but also doesn't pretend that something isn't what it is. With respect to, there really aren't a lot of data points out there to suggest that people are physiologically healthy when they are metabolically obese. And I think that's the biggest challenge that we see, is that people, as I said before, they get their ideologies or their beliefs or their personal worth tied up in their dietary lifestyles or their exercise lifestyles, and it's just a recipe for disaster for those people in the long term.
Yeah. Yeah. This thing I saw was a very minor point. It was about diet soda, right? It was like the perennial debate about diet soda. And it was like, do they make you feel hungrier? Was the essential question. And I was like, this is an easy test to run. Do they make you feel hungrier? So he had put up a post that says diet soda doesn't make you hungrier. And I was like, if you use the word you in there, people take it in a different way than if you say, in general, diet sodas don't make people hungrier. And it's like, it's a thing where I realize we get really caught up. I mean, apparently I'm not made for social media, because that's how you do social media, right? You say the incendiary thing.
There's a reason I have 3,000 followers on Instagram right now. I don't do hyperbole very well at all, so we're good.
Right. But I mean, the reality is, I think where I have ended up, I used to be that person who was like, this is my tribe, F y'all. And now I'm like, well, that doesn't really, in the long term, not the best approach. But I think it comes from, I don't know if the right word is bullied, but there is this feeling of growing up stigmatized or marginalized or just not okay with yourself, even if it's all internal.
Sure.
Where when you finally find what is a tribe that is feels like is speaking to you, sees you, understands you, feels you, welcomes you, you will fight to the death for that.
Yeah, it becomes your family to some degree, right? I agree. I am quite loyal to my community at KetoGains as a general rule. But if we ever say something that is unsupported by science, I want to be cross-checked into the boards, and I want somebody to show me so that we can get better and that we can help theoretically more people by presenting the science and then kind of bringing it back to, okay, this is what the data says. Now let's look at where you're at and how much of this we can apply in your life without making you neurotic, like a house cat that's always on the wrong side of a door, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, so what would you say, KetoGains was kind of early in the, so when I came into keto, which was over 5 years ago, at that time, keto, at least by the general keto doing public, was defined as a pretty high fat diet.
Yes.
And I know KetoGains was sort of one of the only at the time voices out there that was like, maybe not high. How would you define the difference between KetoGains and the rest of the keto community 5 years ago?
So this is a position that I will take, and I have to apply context. If you're doing a ketogenic diet for oncologic adjuvant care, if you're doing this for an epileptic disorder, if you're doing this for, neurological degenerative disease, something that is very targeted in a therapeutic application, my answer is very, very different than my answer would be if we're overweight and uncomfortable, or we're trying to figure out how to cut sugar because our metabolic panels came back borked or whatever. In the construct of that second thing, right? In the idea of like, hey, how do we deal with somebody who is obese or overweight, or, and I'm kind of parsing another subsection of that group. The answer is this: any diet that is willfully low enough in carbohydrate to elicit ketone production is by its very definition a ketogenic diet. And everything else that we apply after that is just context and nuance and personal opinion and preference. Is my diet making me produce ketones in any measurable or significant amount? And if the answer is yes, I'm on a ketogenic diet. Hey, fasting is a ketogenic diet. By its very definition, it may be what we would consider like a cyclical ketogenic diet because you may not eat low carb when you do eat, but it is technically a ketogenic diet. Eating a quote unquote regular diet and then training like an idiot, 6 hours, 8 hours a day, like I used to do years ago, that's going to be a ketogenic diet in almost every circumstance, unless you're eating 400 or 500 grams of carbohydrates a day. There's just 1,000 different roads that all lead to Rome with respect to how we define it. So our approach was to really say, hey, look, if somebody is lean and healthy or underweight and trying to gain, absolutely. Butter your butter, please. By all means, throw sticks in the coffee. Like, I don't care. Eat all the bacon you can get your hands on, so long as we're not seeing evidence from blood work of any kind of a irrationally high response of like cholesterol. And I know that's going to be a hot button issue for the community as well. But, as long as we're not seeing any evidence of short-term or intermediate term harm, and we're getting some weight on you and we're helping in other areas, then by all means, that's fine. But if somebody shows up and they're 70, 80, 100, 200 pounds overweight, they are the high fat in the diet. And I know that's a hard thing to hear. And I hope I get a little bit of a pass, since I was probably twice as heavy as most of the audience here. But that's the reality. I did not need to eat a lot of fat because I was the lot of fat in my diet. Mm-hmm. The body just doesn't starve itself very well. There was this whole hypothesis that was out there with respect to cellular starvation, and I just don't see the data supporting it. As the body is starved of carbohydrate by and large, it just starts to decrease the production of insulin. So your basal insulin goes down. So now all of a sudden, all that fat that was trapped is much more able to be released as free fatty acids into circulation. So the notion of cellular starvation and having to eat fat to lose fat is inherently just sort of prima facie dead, right? Like, it doesn't hold up in any scientific rigor. But the issue is, it's one of these things where it works until it doesn't work for people. And so kind of back to the comment about, hey, there's a lot of people who have a lot of success, and then all of a sudden they become very adherent or very banner carrying for this group or that group. I use this expression, and I hate tautologies, but it works until it doesn't. Is kind of the problem. We run into an issue where it's like, hey, great, when I weighed 500 pounds, I could eat 9,000 calories a day of food and still lose weight. Mm-hmm. Body fat like crazy. Then as I got down into the 400s, it was more like 6,000 or 7,000 calories a day. And then as I got down into the 300s, it was like, probably 3,000 to 4,000 calories a day. And so you start to see this downward trend. But if we get into a mindset where calories don't matter because the diet is so powerful in its ability to satiate and to sort of spontaneously reduce calorie intake, we get into this false narrative that you've been lied to. And so circling kind of again back to the sort of cultist or the tinfoil, if you will, in the community, I think a lot of it is kind of born there, right? Like, I think there's a lot of that. But to put a real fine point on it, I think that a ketogenic diet really depends on the individual. If the individual is overweight, it probably needs to be lower in fat and a little higher in protein as a percentage of their total calorie intake. If they're lean or underweight, then give them everything they can get their hands on, to be honest. I'm not even super concerned about it being purely keto at that point. So in a scenario like that, yeah, it really doesn't matter. That person has either mastery of their fork or they exercise enough that they're staying, lean and healthy. And so, yeah, there really is no clear definition, I guess, is the finer point here. It's that
circumstantial, like it depends on the circumstance.
So. Very much so.
Situational. That's the word I'm looking for. Yeah.
That's all good. I knew what you meant. We're good.
Yeah, I'm going to circle back because I have a quote and you started to touch on it. I think it's a major point. So I want to get back to it, which is, we'll hear a lot of people in the sort of more calorie camp, and that it's a camp is, a thing, right? They'll say, well, all that matters is calories. If you think calories matter, then you think all that matters is calories, but your KetoGains. So clearly you think keto has an advantage.
I do.
I would assume. So if calories, if we just take it as a given that there is a thing called a calorie and calories can be counted and calories are a unit of measure. So like that is just a given and we don't have to debate that part at all. So if that's true, and if, it sounds like you are definitely part of team calculate calories in your calculations if you're calculating, then what is the advantage you think keto still retains?
So I think there's a couple of points. The first I mentioned a minute ago, satiety is a really big one. So, part of the challenge is that fat, when looked at by itself, really doesn't have a lot of data supporting that it's highly satiating alone. when it is paired with protein, it is more satiating per calorie and per gram mass than protein by itself. Fat plus protein really is sort of the magic sauce. And if I had to pick one macronutrient for satiety, protein is kind of it, which is where I get a little off the rails with some of the calculators and stuff that are out there spouting out, 40 grams of protein a day is all you need. Like, sure, if you're two. Beyond that, there's no data to support that claim whatsoever. And all of the data supporting, it's for longevity. I'm like, sure, you can live to be 120 and you're going to burn through your pension while laying in a hospital bed. And all the data you're basing your decision on is in rodents. So I'm not real sure that I'd be super keen on making that. Well, I'd rather die at 90 having been chopping wood that morning than I would to be 100 and have been laid up in a bed with, age-related sarcopenia. So I think that the satiety side of it really plays in. When people don't get too wrapped around the axle of ratios, they start to just gravitate towards eating vegetables coupled to, or non-starchy vegetables, which are themselves satiating for the most part, coupled to protein plus fat, which I think is a great starting point. I think that really trying to control the insulin roller coaster is really helpful, not only for satiety, but also because it does allow us to liberate more fat from stored body fat. The problem is if you're overeating, it kind of neuters the point. But if you are at a calorie deficit, at least in the short term, there is kind of an advantage.
You think that gives you increased satiety?
I think it not only gives you a little bit of increased satiety, I think it also, you have a little more result. And I think you look at the A to Z studies and some other things, you can see that people, at least in the early stages of low carb, do tend to lose more weight more quickly. And I think that one of the biggest things is that people get derailed with diet is when they hit the doldrums and there's just not a lot happening. So when you can get some wins early on, when you're trying to make a diet change or a lifestyle change, you get to put the feather in your cap and you just kind of get to keep going. And so giving people opportunities to have quick wins. And somebody's like, well, it's all water weight. I don't care.
Right. I look better. I feel better.
And if somebody sticks around for another week or 2 weeks or commits themselves when they hit a stall to stick to it because they have all of this experience here, I don't care. Placebo is a powerful thing. Let's use it to our advantage, right? But also, I think it just simplifies dinner to some degree too. It's like, hey, I'm going to put some meat on a skillet, or I'm going to go cook it on a stove or a fire or whatever your thing is. And I'm going to cook a vegetable. You don't have to get creative. I used to spend 2 to 3 hours sometimes in the course of a day making meals in the kitchen or out of my grill or whatever. And the reality is most days I spend less than 30 minutes. So it kind of frees me from having to stand in the kitchen, looking in the pantry, seeing all the food I don't want to eat or whatever. So I do think that there's kind of time-saving benefits that exist there. I think that there are simplicity benefits, I guess I should say. I think that there are satiety benefits in terms of not eating too much. And then I also think that there are some physiologic benefits, at least in the short to intermediate term. I think in the long term, we start to see that calories really do drive the bus in terms of the total net effective fat loss. But at the end of the day, if we get people feeling generally better, and I will also say some of those studies have been conducted on metabolically healthy people. So we may see a very different result when we look at a metabolically deranged individual. Sorry for those of you that don't like that word, my bad.
I use that all the time. I think it's the best way to say it, honestly.
It really is. Your body is trying to deal with the fact that you are probably giving it too much food in total. And it's doing everything it can to increase your activity levels. It's doing everything it can to increase your metabolic rate by upregulating thyroid function and blah, blah, blah. But at some point, it's just like, okay, I have to do something with this. And I'm putting it into cells. And that's what happens. So, we do have to consider, that that's a big thing. But I think that, hey, look, for a lot of people, just do the thing. And it's just beneficial enough that they stick to it. It becomes a thing. I think that the biggest challenge is not that you really asked, but I'm going to volunteer. It kind of makes us pariahs socially at times, until you really figure out how to go to a restaurant with friends and order in a way that doesn't make you look like a nutbag. When you go out with friends and you're like, hey, I'm just going to have a bottle of mineral water, or I'm just going to have a Diet Coke or whatever. rather than getting drunk with your friend. Like, it does kind of create this awkwardness that exists, but it's temporal. And I think that we probably as a community should do a better job of helping people navigate the real world.
Right.
Post COVID, now that we're not all drinking, eating Rebel ice cream and drinking diet sodas at home. Yeah, I think we really need to do a better job of helping people to understand how to be social and how to be low carb or keto in a way that doesn't make you look like you're bringing your gram scale to the restaurant and weighing every piece of food that goes into your mouth. That reminds me of a horrible joke I heard as a kid, but we're not going there.
We're not. Let's not. Yeah, I think for a lot of people, like, keto could be an opportunity, though, to learn boundaries you never ever exerted with other people, in terms of being allowed to have some personal decisions that you can own, that you don't have to give up in a social setting. But at the same time, how do you do that is something that they need a lot of support.
With the two comments there. One, I think it's actually beneficial to the person in general to look at how this is going to sound really counterintuitive, but it's kind of Epicurean or Stoic in nature. But like, how do I learn to be comfortable making rules that I abide by in my own life? It starts to reinforce how you establish boundaries internally so that you can start to establish boundaries externally as well. And yeah, you're exactly right. How many of us have had friends who, you start to eat low carb, you start to do this thing, and they're like, don't you want this pizza? And they start messing with you, or they start leaving you off of invitations because whatever. And you just go, oh, I get it. You're a dick. Cool.
Right. Exactly. Like, I mean, it exposes somebody for who they are.
Yeah. Anytime you step outside of societal or cultural norms within your group, it really starts to showcase to you where the toxicities exist within the community that you call home or that you call friends.
Yeah, it's a hard one, but something that is not just holding you back in terms of your health, but is probably holding you back in every single place in your life.
Your
that community.
Yeah, your self-confidence, your sense of self-identity, and your wholeness as a person. Yeah. I tell people all the time, like, I do therapy by barbell and fork. It's not real therapy, clearly, because I'm not licensed. But the point is when you start to get your food in order, you start to get more energy and desire. And so you start to do some kind of exercise, whether it's whatever, even if it's going for a walk. And, good friends of ours really enjoys that too. Like, whatever it is, you just do more of it. You live more of life. And all of a sudden you're like, holy shit, like, things are going good. I'm not as depressed. I'm dealing with, and I want to be very clear, I don't mean that, hey, throw the medicine in the trash. What I'm saying, though, is that it can alleviate some of those feelings of sort of hyper anxiety or panic that come in. But we do need to be careful, too, that we don't become so restrictive with diet, especially if you are, just to be clear, as a person who's dealt with anxiety and depression my whole life, don't let yourself fall into the hole where you're literally like, trying to get to the nth degree of stupid with respect to like all of the nuance of this diet. It ain't that damn hard. It really just isn't that hard. And I think a lot of people just need to hear that, to get to here, it's not that hard. Maybe if you want to go further, it becomes a little more challenging, but I used to joke all the time that people want to look like Lee Haney, but they don't want to work like Lee Haney, and they don't want to have Lee Haney's genetics, and they don't want to take all the steroids that Lee Haney took. Like,
I'm going to have to include a picture of Lee Haney because I think
it's all good. He looks like a myostatin inhibited cow back in the day. Okay. He's a monster of a man. He's huge. Yeah. One of the nicest guys on the planet. But like, that's the problem is like very, very few people want to go there. Very, very few people want to do the work to get down into a size 2 or a size 4, or even if they could physiologically carry off a size 2, size 4, or for, guys, obviously, whatever that waist to inseam ratio is, whatever. But I do think that we need to be careful and we need to be conscious to say, hey, 80% of the work can be done with 20 or 30% of the effort. And the rest of the way is really an up to you thing.
Right. I kind of hold the belief that you can get most of the way to health with for some people, it feels like a huge shift. But you don't have to get into the minor details at all to get from very unhealthy to pretty healthy.
I tell people all the time, like, look, you don't have to so we're a bit notorious about tracking weight and tracking food, and I'll freely own that. But our job is to take people that last 20 or 30% for a lot of our clients. For a good number of our clients, it's to get them started. But the reality is, if I'm getting somebody started and I realize that there's an unhealthy association or relationship there, Kim, you hinted a minute ago about kind of baggage from growing up and being bullied a little and whatever. Look, I grew up in that same space too. I was a big old chunk of a kid, I've joked for years that I'm basically Ferdinand the Bull, and that's just kind of my nature. And so, yeah, you can only imagine how much that went over well in West Kentucky. But we should not be pushing people to the extremes who are not ready for extremes or who have no business being in the extremes. We need to get them and meet them where they are. And sometimes that's just to tell you what, just skip dessert tonight. Sometimes that's just, hey, maybe we can sub out this for this, or we can look at strategies to really get, to your point, 70, 80% of the result with very subtle changes. Even if it is a little bit painful at first, it's not. There's a psychotherapist out in California, and I like the guy a lot. His name is Henry Cloud, and one of the books he wrote was called Necessary Endings. And one of the concepts he talked about was the difference between hurt and harm. And I think it's a really important distinction. He says, when you go see a dentist, for example, they may hurt you in the process of repairing a tooth or extracting a tooth or filling a cavity, but there is no intent to harm. And I think that we need to be very careful that in the process of trying to help people, sometimes those lines get a little blurred, especially from coaches. And I'd put that in air quotes if I didn't have a Band-Aid on my thumb. But, their way is the only way. And I think sometimes that people look at what we do on the outside and go, see, they're just wrapped around this axle. And the reality is probably 15% of our client base isn't even keto at this point. They've reached a point where they want to include some healthier carb options, and we just migrate them into more of a lower carb paleo sort of an approach to life, and they're completely good. And if they gain a little, they just come back to low carb and we get them knocked back a little. The same sort of thing happens frequently with folks who show up and they're like, hey, I have this and this and this, and they want to give you this laundry list of conditions. And like, what do you want me to do? Or how do you want me to eat? And I'm like, just put the damn fork down after the first plate. That's a great start. And then we can work from there. It ain't that hard. It really, really isn't.
And I found myself, in a place where I was willing to hear something different than my sort of first, I don't know how else to say it. I was very attached to this sort of don't count calories, just eat low carb, eat fat, moderate protein. And that really worked initially in a lot of ways. And so in terms of my mentality, right, when I first started keto, it felt very freeing. I felt like I was seeing success when I never felt success before, very satisfied, all those things. But I did hit a point where I was like, well, I'm much healthier than I was, but I don't look like I want to look. And I try to explain this. I felt betrayed. I felt betrayed by keto. I felt like my initial success was a promise that keto made me to fix the thing that was broken in me. And I kept pushing the button and it stopped giving me pellets and I was stuck. And I was like, what's wrong here? And I spent a good number of years actually bashing my head into a wall being like, this is supposed to work. And the reason I reached out to you specifically was the day I reached out to you, I saw somebody post a quote from you. And this is the part of the quote I saw. It says, the really insidious part is that a whole food and low carb diet tends to be powerful enough to work for people, right up until the point when it doesn't. And there are enough people who get very lean without concerning themselves with calories because satiety signaling is intact, that it is seductive to believe that calories are irrelevant because they are somewhat inaccurate. However, when something is inaccurate, the answer is not to abandon a relatively inaccurate measure for no measure at all. I saw that, and I actually read a line in here that apparently doesn't exist. I don't know, maybe it was something else, but somehow in this is called projecting. I read, it's unkind. It is unkind to when people say, I'm not seeing what I want to see. And you're like, well, how many carbs are you eating? Can you drop them a little bit more? And that might be right for some circumstances, some people, but the people out there who are carnivore and are like, I still weigh 200 pounds, and they're me, not you. And they're like, I don't understand. It's like all that you can say if you aren't willing to expand your range to include more explanations than low carb and keto is enough, you leave people on a cliff edge with no ropes, because now all they get to do is feel broken again.
It's the expression, if your only tool's a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, right?
Yeah.
It's been one of my criticisms of the insulin hypothesis in general, is that it's kind of a one-trick pony, and it's sort of like it's the opposite of the black swan. It's the white swan in this conversation, right? So I need to only present one piece of evidence that it's flawed or incomplete, and all of a sudden it sort of falls on its face. And so when you look at the big map of human metabolism, which is insanely complicated and has all these cool circles and whiz bangs and whatever, you start to realize a couple of things that are true. One, the body has redundancies for redundancies. You almost can't get a free lunch from the human metabolism. It is an efficiency engine that makes German motor scientists baffled. It is so insanely efficient at what it does. And secondly, you start to realize that right in the dead ass center of that thing, you start to see that, hey, the hormone implications or the endocrine implications of the diet are baked right into this model. So this notion that, it's calories in, calories out is a wildly oversimplified model. As is, quite frankly, this notion that you eat sticks of butter and you lose body fat, right? Like, I don't know anybody that's doing that. I don't know anybody that's mainlining butter sticks as their principal diet. First of all, because the steatosis would be awful. But secondly, like, it's terrible. And I mean, I say that as a man who once for 2 weeks ate nothing but lard and salt just to prove a point. It's awful. There's no way to make lard taste good. And butter's amazing in and on things. It is not amazing as a thing. I wish we had a more accurate measure than calories. I really do. Kilocalorie is a great unit of measurement, but where I get off the keto bus a little bit here, and I've seen Dr. Fung and others banter about this, it's like, well, the body's not a closed system. Well, no shit, but you can also measure energy in and energy out in a model in a semi-closed system, which is what the human body is. You know, people need to dig a little further into their physics books and understand that we can calculate those inputs and those outputs. We just have a much more complex model of doing so. So they're not a one-to-one. And quite frankly, you look at things like wasting. So like peanut butter, for example, not a great food for people, but you look at the calorie content and you realize that probably 40% of those calories in a more modern test don't really exist. There's sort of these weird fiber lignin things that just don't get digested by the body, but they're not technically fiber. That doesn't mean go crazy on peanut butter. Let me be clear. But my point is that it's not a simple model. It really isn't.
Right.
And when we throw the baby out with the bathwater here in terms of saying, hey, well, if calories aren't accurate, then they don't matter at all, that doesn't follow any logic. You know, they're the best thing we've got right now. Honestly, I'd love to find a better measurement, but I see people using like CGMs to try and diagnose something. And I'm like, what exactly are you trying to conclude? It's cool to see like, hey, how does this food affect me personally with respect to like a blood glucose curve? But it's not going to tell you if the net effect is going to be fat loss, because that's the problem. You can have the lowest insulin you've ever had in your life. But if you're eating 7,000 calories a day and you need 3,000 calories a day, the net effect is going to be fat gain. And there's nothing that I can do to make that different. I wish it, and I'm being very hyperbolic in the numbers here, but the reality is it's all we got at this point. I hope we come up with another solution. But telling people something that is untrue or giving people some idea of false hope, you use the word, and I think it's perfect. It is an unkind thing to do. I am a rip the Band-Aid off kind of a guy. I just say it in 700 words instead of 7, but I will get there. The problem that we have in the community is that exactly what I said. There are enough people who have had success because they're metabolically healthy by and large, or they've had intact satiety signaling. They don't have baggage from their past that's making them eat for non-physiologic reasons. There's enough of those people that are being held up as examples of how this thing is true that contradicts the totality of the science that's been conducted on this, that now people are chasing after these sort of Jim Jones-esque false prophets. And when they get hurt or lost or left to the wayside, they get accused. You didn't keto hard enough, or you just got to believe and lower the insulin more, or you got to raise the fat. These things are not helpful for people who are stalled in their fat loss. And then when you raise your hand and you say, that doesn't make sense, you're immediately castigated and tossed to the side because you're now a non-believer. This is the problem with religion inserting itself into diet and science. It just isn't a healthy thing. I wish we had a better measure. We don't. So let's roll with what we got and let's look at the individual and say, what are the outcomes that we're getting? And then let's make adjustments for you as an individual. And people can do this themselves. They don't need a coach.
Right.
Look at the results you're getting and then look at the data points and say, hey, what could I modify here to see what the outcome is? I'm not convinced that we're the right approach for 100% of people. I'm not convinced that these people are the wrong approach for 100% of people, but I do think that there's a pretty good Venn diagram here of people that are just getting left in the wayside or behind with no food, no clothing, and no transportation because the community has become so insular and protective that it cannot hear dissenting voice at all.
We cannot acknowledge that you still have a problem doing what we said you should do.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like I got left behind and I had to find my way. Even though there were people saying the thing that I needed to hear, maybe like I had to find my way. And I think for a lot of people, when you are part of a community or part of a culture or part of a belief system, even if you're not like in a thing, you still like in your mind, you grabbed hold of an ideology. I think it can take some work to get to the other side of that and say, okay, all right, let's investigate. And, that's a journey that for some people takes longer than for others.
Well, I think also you start with that preconception, right? It becomes, but you said all I had to do was cut carbs. You said all I had to do was raise fat. Just to put a fine point, and I'm working with somebody who's kind of transitioning out of the carnivore community right now, who gained 30 pounds and started showing signs of scurvy. And the whole time he was being told, oh, no, there's nothing wrong. There's no issue here. Your body's just healing itself.
It reminds me of what you hear about the vegans.
Yeah, it's your body is just eliminating all of those toxins and they're holed up in, he said, and I just don't want to believe this, that he said that somebody suggested they were holed up in the teeth. And my response was, well, good news. If you keep not eating fruits or vegetables, you probably won't have any teeth left to worry about them being holed up in. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to say, but it breaks my heart, Kim. I have a daughter, parents who are elderly, father's a heart attack survivor. I could not sleep with myself at night if I was acting in ways knowing that I was materially harming another human being. Mm-hmm. I don't know that the entirety of our community sees things the same way. I think that sometimes people, I've joked before that some of these coaches will pat you on the back, but it's just as a means to slide their hand to your ass and pull out your wallet. And that's a real...
I think that's true. And I want to also say, don't attribute to what malice, what can be ascribed to
incompetence.
Ignorance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hanlon's razor.
I think like for me, I often talk about the fact that I call myself, I was once a keto teenager, right? Like I thought I knew everything and I didn't. And so I think there's a lot of people out there who like, if you are a hammer salesman and you have a hammer and hammers always work for you, there's going to be a bias that hammers are all you need. I don't think that has to be malice.
I have seen malice, and so unfortunately it frustrates me, but you're absolutely right. There are people who get certified or don't get certified, but put up a shingle and are really good at marketing, and they're just incompetent. And sometimes it's a little of the blind leading the blind, right? They both fall into a ditch, and it's unfortunate, but I don't really concern myself with the profit as much as I do the followers. And that's where I get real pissy, quite frankly, about it.
Well, I get to this place where like, I am unwilling to stop until I can help you. Mm-hmm. And telling you what you've heard 1,000 times that didn't work, I don't believe it's going to work the 1,000th because you haven't heard it 1,001 times. I'm going to want to dig to figure out why is it not working for you?
I told somebody once as a client of mine that there's only so white you can turn your knuckles when you grip the steering wheel. It doesn't matter if you grip it tighter, hold on to it for dear life, your knuckles go white and they don't turn invisible. They don't turn translucent. Sometimes the answer is just try different. It's not try harder. It's not repeat until it, sometimes the answer isn't just plow head first into the wall over and over and over again until it breaks. Sometimes they just look to your left and realize there's a damn path that just walks right around the thing and then get on it and do the thing. But yeah, exactly right. When you don't have the tools as a coach or as a mentor, as a leader to guide, lead, or coach the people that trust you, you are doing them an unfortunate disservice. There's just no nice way to put it. And circling all the way back, throwing out calories as a potential unit or a useful unit of measure is a perfect example of what ends up happening. Are the people that gain and show up in our community convinced that keto doesn't work, but they heard we do it differently. And I'm like, no, we just,
nuance it.
Yeah. It's like, hey, let's look at what you got going on rather than like what you read in a book.
Right. So I was in that sort of like calories don't matter. I bought that. I was like, calories don't matter. That's awesome.
I'd love for it to be true. Let me be clear.
Awesome. Yeah.
Be all on board.
And then because the whole, psycho calories in, calories out. And then one day I sort of was like, oh, that word does not mean what people think that means. Right. It's like, oh, just because people misuse a concept doesn't mean the concept is flawed. It means the explanation is.
There was an old Atkins community that I came across years ago, back when I first started this. It was still somewhat active. And one of the things that was said there, and I thought it was a great quote, is that Dr. Atkins never said calories don't count. He said, don't count calories.
Right.
And I think that it's a little turn of phrase, but I think that it's like, look, if you're somebody who can eat this way, keep calories at a reasonable level and get the results you want, super. Like, that's wonderful. That's the goal. Mm-hmm. But if you're filled with all of this nonsense and all of this noise and you fall into this trap that like, I can eat literally anything and not gain or lose, it's just a countdown timer starts before you become disillusioned with what's going on.
Right. And then the other thing that happens, right, is people will be like, they go look up a TDEE, right? They look up for my height, size, weight, gender. I should be able to eat X amount of calories before I gain weight, X amount before I lose weight. And if I don't fall into this range, then calories are useless. And the thing people are clearly missing there is like, if you look at the worker like Ponzer, the same person, if you had like a person hologram, there's so much variation, even when many things are equated, that it doesn't matter what someone else's XYZ is. It matters what your XYZ is.
So, his whole constrained energy theory model makes a lot of sense. It's also really, really frustrating to have to think about. But kind of a boiled down version of some of the early work anyway was this notion that when he looked at like the Hasda people, that when they looked at the actual calorie expenditures from these people who walk huge distances and hunt and gather and do all this stuff, they really didn't find that on their size basis, they really expended that much more calorie output to live their life than somebody who works a desk job in, San Fran doing whatever, right? Like there's just not a big difference. And it really painted this odd picture because science would have told us, hey, these people in this tribal situation should have been burning 2 or 3 times the amount of calories that we were seeing over here. And so what, you see, and you can go read the book, it's a great book, is that there's just a lot more to the story that we're still uncovering with respect to just how metabolically adaptive the human body really is. Mm-hmm. And so, the exactly right. Hey, great. Cash McCardle's a great formula for coming up with an approximation of, BMR and TDEE. That's cool and all, but kind of come back. What's the outcome? Mm-hmm. Are you losing? Are you gaining? Are you staying the same? Which do you want to do? How can we modify these things? Hey, how are you feeling? How are you recovering? How are you performing? But it was kind of a really interesting point in that book or in his original papers and some of this sort of inferences is that as much as I cringe to say CrossFit got something right because they have, but yeah, one of the things that I think they really may have stumbled onto is the notion of novel exercise or of I hate the term confuse the muscles because that's not what's happening, but the notion of like doing things that you really suck at physically are a great way to burn more calories because you're not hyper efficient at doing it. But as you do it more, you become really, really good at doing as little as possible to actually move that weight or lift that thing or walk that distance.
Adaptation is real, and we have to take it into account or we will suffer for it.
Mm-hmm. Although I will say this, I like Kevin Hall. I know that's probably a very painful thing to say in the keto community.
You like everybody. Well, almost. Anyway.
I like most people. Most people haven't given me a reason to dislike them. I've got pretty thick skin. Thanks to diabetes. No, I'm kidding. Though I did have diabetes, so don't get mad at me. But I do have really thick skin and it's hard to offend me too awful much. But, I'm not sure that the Line of Best Fit model in his Biggest Loser study really says what we think it says with respect to low carb or low calorie diets cause metabolic dysregulation. And it's years before the body can heal itself. I haven't seen that to be the case with the data that I've actually seen. I think that calorie creep is real. And I think that people start to eat more than they realize in a lot of cases. And I know some fitness guys were looking at that Line of Best Fit model that was in that paper and applying it to themselves and coming up with weird conclusions like that their baseline for healthy metabolism was like 4,700 calories a day, which is almost double what it should have been for them because they're smaller dudes that just happen to be muscular. And the point was like, hey, anything below that would be considered metabolic damage. And it's like, do I really believe that I'm 50% metabolically damaged when I am like 8% body fat? Every marker looks wonderful. I eat a wide variety of foods. I'm otherwise healthy. Life is good. How the hell am I supposed to claim that that's metabolic damage? So I start to kind of wonder, is it that, or is it just the adaptations that happen with respect to longer term diet interventions? So that's a 4-hour conversation over drinks the next time we happen to be together. But
that's good. Yeah. There's so much, the deeper you go into all of this, I guess it's the Dunning-Kruger of life, is like, the more you know, the more you realize nobody knows what they say it's all interesting things to discuss. The challenge is when you're new to something, you want certainty. Yes. And so when you don't have confidence, you want to borrow someone else's a lot of times. And the people out there in the world saying, this is a little complicated. It depends. It's the situation, this, that, the other thing. They don't seem as confident, though they are more skilled and more they get it better than the people who are like, there's one thing to do. I'll tell you the thing to do. Sign up here. Here is the solution. I will fix it. And then they don't fix it. And then people assume they're broken instead of this person was wrong because they were so confident and so sure.
Yeah. That's the really dangerous part of those types of things. I'm defective. I'm broken. Right. And I couldn't live with myself, honestly, if I was in a situation where people walked away from engagements with me convinced that there was something wrong with them that really was just wrong with the approach that they were taking. It was the running headfirst into the wall instead of walking around the path or climbing over.
Right. I'm 45 years old. There is no non-surgical intervention that's going to make me look 25. It's just reality, right? But I can look like the best version of me, but I don't even remember where I was going with this. But, I guess the thing is that we do have limits, right? About where we might go. But I think it's our job to never stop pushing the needle further that we can get better. Oh, I remember what I was going to say, that there is no one that can't be helped.
I think that if you're going to hang a shingle out and call yourself a coach or a clinician or an interventionist or whatever term we want to use, that you owe it to your patients, clients, and the people around you to be as good at your job as you possibly can be. And that means entertaining alternative theories and, different approaches and tailoring those approaches and learning new and novel things to bring to the conversation. And if you're not going to do that, stop calling yourself anything but, grifter or charlatan. I mean, I hate to be that guy, but
influencer.
That's the other side of the coin. Yeah. I saw some data the other day that basically suggested that the influencer community was sort of dying and drying on the vine because in the COVID era, it's taking like 3 or 4 times as many influencer dollars to generate the same dollar of purchase on products. And I've just concluded for a while, I think that people are just parking money with the wrong influencers, right? Rather than people that have lived it and done it and have evidence and showcase things.
Actualizers.
Yes. They're literally throwing money to everybody who rents a Lambo for the day and says, look how smooth and cool I am. I don't even fit in a Lambo. Let me be clear. So I won't ever rent one for the day. It'll just be on the parking lot with all the other fancy cars if I did. But no, the reality is that's the image or the problem right now is desperate people gravitate to certainty. You're exactly right. If you have 2 people, one who says, I think I can help you, and the other says, I know I can help you, you're going to immediately presume that the person with more confidence is the person with more qualification and competence. And that's not a safe thing to conclude. And I'm not sure if the answer is, hey, those of us who are competent and confident need to get better at marketing, or whether that conversation is, hey, we should be openly talking about the grift or the bullshit of this, individual in terms of how they are manipulating and using desperate people in some way, either through incompetence or sheer malice.
Yeah. And I think something I watch out for in myself, and I could probably watch out for more. I want to say is there is a way that a lot of my life I felt discounted because I lived in a bigger body. Mm-hmm. And now that I live in a less bigger body, I notice a tendency to look at fitness leaders, influencers, I don't know what to call them, people in the fitness industry who never struggled and want to say, F those people. But the reality is, am I just being as prejudiced as people? I don't know. It's just a thought that came up, that I'm like, those people can't understand you. You're 300 pounds. They've never been over 125. Why are you taking their program?
I have found some of those folks who have gone out of their way in the past to really understand.
Yeah.
Excuse the expression, but the plight, if you will, of those of us who were obese or super obese or, whatever. But most of them have never really had to struggle. They didn't blend into the wallpaper at office meetings. They didn't break chairs. They didn't awkwardly leave after one drink when all the circles were closed up and nobody was there to talk with them. Those are just realities for those of us that are there. I've told people before, when I was at my heaviest, I could visibly see that I made people uncomfortable. I thought they were going to catch fat from being around me. I counted once and just noticed the number of times that everybody at the table would get a handshake. And then when I'd stand up to say goodbye, the person would just wave at you from across the table and say, it was nice meeting you, and, walk the other direction. And those things have lasting scars that have nothing to do with our metabolisms. They have to do with our psychology around food as comfort. There's a reason that obese people tend to be abusers of food, alcohol, and drugs on a much higher basis than the otherwise fit, if you will, individuals. And that's a damn shame. But the reality is, as long as we're giving money and influence to people who don't know how to speak to that community because of false certainty or because of good marketing, you don't want to get into victim blaming, because I know that they're desperate for the result that they're after, that they see that they think they can achieve. Mm-hmm. But damn, it rips my guts out to think about just how many dollars are spent chasing after something that's either, quite frankly, look, some dreams die. And that's unfortunate. To your comment earlier, I'm 43. I weighed 500 pounds. I'm stitched back together and I look a little like Frankenstein's monster under his shirt. But look, the reality is I'm never going to look like a fitness model ever again. Not that I did before, but nonetheless, that's never going to be a thing. And I just have to accept that that's just a truism. But what can I do? How can I succeed? Where can I go? How can I start to work on the self-confidence to take my shirt off in public and not think people are going to hide their children's eyes? How do I get to a point where I am comfortable living the fullness of my life, including my diet, my lifestyle, all of these things? And it ain't flashy Instagram models. It's not buying the right workout equipment or the right clothes. It's get your house in order, one room at a time until it's all put together. So
yeah, it's so important. And I think all we can do, what I always come back to is all I can do is tell my story, live my life, grow, show my growth, and hope that somebody sees that, wow, okay, she didn't actually start getting her act together until that happened. Maybe there's hope for me too.
Yeah, you live vulnerable and transparent and trust that there is an inherent goodness of people and that you're strong enough to deal with the turds that come along, right? That's
always fun.
That's the only way that we absolutely and accurately grow. And by the way, I am absolutely wearing a shirt that says violates community standards in the front. So a little double speak here, but the reality is, look, that is the truth of the matter of how we change as people fundamentally, is that we all get together and take the damn masks off and just start being real about, hey, difficulties and struggles. I can think of about 4 different fitness people who didn't deal with the obesity thing. They dealt with being rail skinny and tiny, and they got picked on too. They got dealt the crap hand at times too, and they've done a lot of what they've done through sheer hard work. And for us to throw the shade to their direction, to your comment, to say, hey, they've never understood what it's like to be bullied or picked on or abused or whatever. I know one who opened up to me pretty candidly talking about abuse that made my stomach turn as a father. Growing up, like, it's not my place to determine who is and isn't deserving of a pass from me. Totally. In terms of understanding and empathy about what I've been through or what you've been through, or quite frankly, what they've been through. But sometimes excuse the expression, sometimes the douche is a little strong to deal with, like sometimes it's like, look, dude, if you're not going to be real, I can't be a part of this conversation. Right. And I just think that we would all be better off if we just started being honest about the crap that's broken in our lives, or the things that we're struggling with, or the things I was telling somebody there is like, COVID and sitting around doing nothing but eating put 20 pounds on me. Like, that sucks. But the answer is I know how to get it off. And I'm just,
you have hope.
I have not only hope, but I have the track record, the experience. And if I didn't, and I can openly say to somebody, hey, here's a thing. It's like, hey, great. When do you want to work out? I'll show up with you. Or, hey, why don't you send me screenshots of your food tracking, just so you've got an accountability partner. Like, those are the things that we need in our lives. And I was reading something the other day. I want to, because I'm a dork. So y'all are going to
look it up.
I read everything under the sun. So it was a book. And one of the things that the author said, and of course it's going to be, said, you need people to serve in different roles in your life. You need someone who can pump you up when you're feeling down, someone to provide emotional support and a shoulder to cry on, someone to give you honest feedback in a helpful way, and someone who can provide practical information and support. I probably qualify as number 4. And I've got pretty broad shoulders if somebody needs a shoulder to cry on, but I don't fill all those roles. And if I don't have those people in my life, and if you don't have those people in your life, and if our clients or our people in the communities don't have those people, it's unfortunate and it's sad to say, but they're kind of living 2/3 or 3/4 of a life because they don't have a place to go with those vulnerabilities and those weaknesses and those challenges. So they internalize them. And what do we do when we internalize? Those of us that are prone to eating disorders, or we eat, or we self-medicate with alcohol, or whatever the thing is that's our drug of choice, we fill gaps with something.
Right. I was listening to a podcast with Ethan Suplee the other day. Do you know Ethan Suplee? He's actor.
Actor, yeah.
Yeah.
A monster now. He's
crazy. I know. So muscular. But he mentioned it was good. Like, he just said this it was like an aside, and it hit me, but it was about that sort of thing when you're 300 pounds, 400 pounds, 500 pounds, whatever, that like unacceptable, like whenever you're outside the norm, right, by a significant amount, the overwhelming weight, like mental weight of trying, just how like debilitated you feel by existing, that like the idea of even hoping that you could change your life feels too scary because you feel so bad about yourself and you have so much failure. It made me remember that I haven't felt that way in a very long time. that I haven't felt like I don't have some level of control in my life. It just reminded me when you said, you can do something about this 20 pounds you gained or whatever. Like, you have tools. And I just started kind of really putting a lot of effort in the gym in a way that I really haven't maybe ever, maybe in decades, but at least in my memory. And I am fighting depression so hard every time I go to the gym. And I'm just getting vulnerable here, which is like, I feel like a loser in the gym. Like every time I try and do something and I can't do it, or like I try to do this exercise and I guess how much I could lift on it and I am nowhere near close. I'm like, I don't think the pin goes that high, Kim. Like, do they have a negative pound on this?
Can somebody just come over here and spot me on this machine, right?
5 pounds. Yeah. And I hate feeling bad at things. I am very bad at being bad at anything. And my natural personality is to not do things I'm bad at because I hate it so much, because I make it mean so much about who I am.
So let me tell you a story.
Oh, yeah.
When I was 18, I was squatting 685. I deadlifted 705 and my max bench was 405. That's a lot of weight.
That's really good, people, if you don't know.
And then I just sort of stopped lifting because it stopped being fun and stopped being challenging. And for 20 years, almost 20 years, I didn't touch a weight. And when I came back, I started rebuilding strength, and I get to a point where I'm squatting 405, which is, for those of you out there, it's like 4 45-pound plates on the side of a bar. And you can feel the bar bending on your neck. And it's like, oh, cool. And I literally racked the weight one day and I said, I hate myself. Mm. And I was talking with a friend of mine and she said, why? And I said, when you've ascended Mount Everest, it's really, really hard to stand on Bunker Hill. Mm. And I think that sometimes from a fitness community perspective, we don't acknowledge that, but we also don't acknowledge the strength that it takes for people who have never grown up in gym culture to come into a gym and spend time in a gym and to have those confrontations with their own weaknesses or their own inabilities, to not just fist bump them when you walk by, but actually give a damn. Like, spend some time talking with the person, see where they're at, see if you can help. If nothing else, hey, look, here's my email. If you've got questions, here's my number, just text me, call me, whatever. I'm happy to tell you, hey, how to do this movement in a way that doesn't make you feel like you don't know what you're doing, or to send you a video to show you, somebody who does a really good job of teaching that movement. Like, if we recognize that depression happens on both ends of that narrative or that spectrum, we get to a point where we start to see the humanity across the entirety of the people that are there. And quite frankly, we start to understand better. Hey, why are people afraid to go in a gym? When I first went back to the gym, I can't tell you how many times I drove through the parking lot and just left.
Yeah.
How many? Like, I remember my personal trainer that I had there for a while. I texted her and she was like, hey, what's up? And I'm like, I can't come in. She's like, are you sick or something? I'm like, no, I'm sitting in the parking lot. I can't come in. She said, why? Because I'm having a damn panic attack in the parking lot in my vehicle right now, freaking out. She was like, okay, what's going on? I'm like, I got to go. And I just hung up the phone and drove off the like. There is a real fear of judgment. There is a real fear of shame. There is a real fear of both failure and success that happens. And the reality is, and I love the gym for teaching me this, but I also understand why it scares people. To borrow Henry Rollins' line, iron doesn't lie. If you have bad sleep, if you have bad diet, if you have bad fitness, you're going to find out about it in the gym. It is the great exposer of all things. But it is also an amazing instructor and an amazing teacher with respect to resilience and developing strength and working, through your point, Kim, through the process of becoming stronger, rather than seeing an end goal at a specific number or something, just saying, hey, how can I improve? What can I do? Maybe it's just improving technique, not weight, just figuring things out in that way. It is an amazing instructor when it is looked at correctly, but it is a scary, scary headmaster if you just approach it or have had it thrust upon you in a way where you have all of this anxiety and this worry about it. So I will say I'm with you from a different perspective. There is a lot of, I don't like feeling weak, even if I'm not by everybody else's sort of standards. It's hard to compare you to you if you've been somewhere that you're currently not capable of going. And I think it's the same thing when people are really getting familiar and really learning the gym culture and really learning how to use equipment is like, hey, I want to jump out the second story window right now because I feel like a complete idiot or like I'm never going to get this. I mean, I've heard a whole bunch of them and just roaming through the gym. And, it's funny. I stopped one time when I was working at I've got a private gym here now at my office, but, I was working out at a public gym. I saw somebody just getting really frustrated and I walked over. I was like, hey, what's going on? Like, I can't figure this out. And the stupid machine is broken. And I was like, okay, what are you trying to do? Trying to explain to me. And I'm like, okay, cool. Let me show you how the machine works. And so, we had this conversation and, he looks at me and says, I've been over here getting pissed off for the last 30 minutes for something you fixed in 3 seconds. And I'm like, I've been here a bit. And he just got mad. He's like, I have seen 5 employees and nobody's come over here to help me. And it's like, okay, then we should just be better people to each other. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to say there, but God, the gym's got a bad enough reputation as it is already. We don't need to worry about making it any worse. We should, sorry to get on a soapbox, but try and make it a little better and a little more approachable for everybody. Because there's lessons I've learned in the gym that I could have never learned anywhere else in life.
Yeah. And I think this is a thing where I think it's important to always challenge yourself somewhere. I also think it's also important to also find places that don't feel as challenging, right? You need a spectrum.
The buffet line for me was part of that, but now I have to change that. But no, I agree. Sitting in a chair reading a book is my not challenging place.
Yeah,
so
you need a balance.
Oh, I dig it.
Yes. So that's mine. And I think, if I am unwilling to keep feeling uncomfortable, then that's the day my life is worth a lot less than it, because I remember early on when I started coaching, my philosophy was, I don't have to know anything, but I have to be willing to go first.
Good.
And if I'm not willing to challenge the thought or do the thing, I'm not doing all the things, but if I'm saying to do the thing, I should do the thing. And I don't have to know it all. But if I pretended that the gym was like, no big deal, I'm so happy there. Every time I leave the gym, I feel better about people are like, I've seen people with quotes and say, I've never left the gym feeling worse. And I'm like, that is not true of me. I have left the gym many times feeling like a complete
physically
loser.
Worse, emotionally worse. Yeah. All of the above.
But this is the contract I made with my life, that I lived my first 40 years only seeking comfort, and I kind of screwed everything up. So trying something new.
I like that. I've said before that one of the reasons that I'm completely okay with pain now is because when I quit the gym, I spent damn near 20 years trying to eat, drink, and avoid every part of emotional, physical trauma, pain, whatever. So give me pain over contentment and comfort any day. Is that sort of insane? Yeah, probably. But I think we all come to it from our own perspectives, right? For me, I seek out discomfort, which is really what I mean by pain. It's like I seek out, those things. I get my ass handed to me on a regular basis for doing so in a good way, because it reminds me there's a lot more left to learn. There's a lot. Yeah, I've said before, I think that we should all have something that we're masters at in our lives, but we should also have something that we're absolute rank beginners at in our lives. And I think that that's a challenge for me right now. I'm actually looking around going, hey, what do I want to learn that I don't know how to do? Or what can I explore that I am completely unfamiliar with, where I'm going to have to look at somebody else and be like, hey, hold my hand, walk me through this, show me how this machine works, and explain to me why I don't look like an idiot doing this thing, because I feel like I look like an idiot doing this thing.
Tyler joins ballet.
Well, it was jujitsu for a while, and then I started to get the hang of it. And then I was like, crap, COVID hit. It was a year and a half out of the gym. So now I'm like, okay, what's on the next horizon? I don't think my feet will fit in the shoes, but I can twirl. We're good.
All right.
But no, I'm not sure what it is, but we'll see where it goes.
I was reading a book recently. I think it's called 4,000 Days. it's got the word like life hack productivity in the title, but that's not what the book's actually about. And in it, he was talking about like the point of having a hobby is to be bad at something. Essentially, like the fact that these days we turn every hobby into a hustle, into like a job, it negates the purpose of a hobby, which is essentially to do something that has no purpose.
I like that.
Yeah. But, we've meandered about, which is normal for my conversations. That's what we do. But is there something you feel like you want to wrap things up with talking about?
I was actually going to share really quickly one of my favorite Nietzsche quotes, and I'm not a huge Nietzsche guy, but one of the things he said was, "He who would learn to fly one day must first learn to stand and to walk and to run and to climb and to dance, for one cannot fly into flying." And I think that that's really a lot of what we sort of, the ground we covered in 20 minutes, he covered in 20 words. But I think that that's a lot of it. I genuinely wish the world would recognize that they should be kinder to themselves. Not sure if this is where you wanted to go, but I'm an existential dude,
I have no direction.
Look, I look around and I see comparison happening, sort of the keeping up with the Joneses thing socially and in offices. I see it, I see it in gyms. I see it on social media. I see it in all these places. And the reality is where you are is where you are. And most of us are pretty damn good at something or at some place. And, you sort of do that thing where you project your own thoughts about someone else, right? Like, I was telling a story a while back. I was working with a social media influencer who was telling me, that he was photoshopping almost all the pictures because he had gained like 45 pounds and really, and that he was, I want to say it was like $80,000 in debt at this point, trying to live the influencer lifestyle, traveling all over the world, had no home, no car, no anything, basically was just completely out on, the streets for all intents and purposes. And we don't know, like, that's the reality, is we don't know what somebody else's battle has been like from their growing up until now. We don't know what somebody's battling in their head from day to day. And it just be kind to you. That's a start. And then maybe be kind to other people, because God help us. I know I'm direct. I absolutely am. Especially, I tend to be moving 100 miles an hour on social media. So I tend to just kind of say it like I think it is and open up the debate. But it's really hard to make lasting change if you hate you.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to bring the people around you to love on you if you're busy hating you and projecting that hate onto them. Start by being nicer to yourself. Apologize, excuse, let shit go. It's just, you're going to neurotic yourself right off the cliff if you're not careful. And this culture that we're in, sort of post-COVID or mid-COVID, depending on where this all goes, it's not a very nice culture, either within our own minds and with respect to how we're treating other people. So maybe I'm a little sappy at the end of this thing, but that's my wish. That's my hope. That's my goal. It's way less sciencey and way more psychology, but I think we'd just be a hell of a lot better off if we just be nice.
Yeah. I think that I totally agree with you. I think a lot of the people like you and me who spent a lot of our lives in a body that wasn't really that functional learn to be really mean to ourselves. And it might, even if we change, and people who live in bodies that look perfectly appropriate as well are mean to themselves. But I think we never know what's going on for somebody else underneath. And we keep ourselves pretty locked in a prison when we're just mean in there all the time.
Spot on.
Yeah.
I completely agree.
Well, I am so glad that we finally had this conversation, and I felt like we'd have some good things to talk about in the world.
I dig it.
Awesome.
Mostly we got to figure out where we're going to hang out next. I don't know where you're going, but
are you going to Metabolic Health Summit?
My wife graduates that week, so I will not be there. I think I will be at PaleoFX. So if you want to microdose mushrooms, you can come and hang. I'm kidding. There was a topic on that last year, and I cackled at the notion of like 7,000 people showing up all slightly high on drugs. But yeah, so
we'll figure it out.
It's all good. It's been too long.
It's been way too long. How can people learn more about you if they want to know more about you?
Well, I wrote a book. You can find it. It's just put my name into Amazon. You'll find it. It's a little more of the philosophy of change that I really have sort of developed over the last few years. just using stories from growing up. You can find me on social. I tell people all the time, I'll be the Tyler Cartwright that looks like this on all the social profiles. And yeah, just reach out. If I can help somebody, I'm happy to offer some thoughts. I'm obviously in KetoGains as a community, the LMNT website, if you want to read some of the more scientific crap, that fun stuff.
Got it. Okay. I will put links in the show notes, and I just want to put a little plug in that I am a big fan of LMNT and use it all the time. Although I would like to complain that grapefruit is not a regular flavor. And I'm just going to say that every time I talk to anyone who works for LMNT.
You just have to pull a ticket like the meat counter at the grocery and get in line to complain about that.
I'm like, can we switch it out with watermelon? Watermelon is very summery as a concept. And I think we can put watermelon as a summer flavor.
You just want to swap them out, like sub them
swap
out.
Them.
Well, I will say we are hopeful to bring it back in the summer. We are still trying to figure out if that's going to be.
Is there a grapefruit shortage? What is this?
There is a dearth of people who do not drink fruity drinks in the winter. And I would say this, I think it's a lot of fun. I really think we want to do more of the seasonal flavor stuff just to give people some variety and some fun, right? Like, there's kind of like the Sam Adams Oktoberfest and Winterfest drinks and stuff. Like we wanted the summer shandy. Like we want to do some fun stuff with with the flavors and just let people try different stuff until they figure out the thing that they like. But I have 4 boxes of the grapefruit over there. So if you are completely out, then send me your address and I will bequeath you one of my boxes. So I
have to take this out of the recording or people are going to bombard you.
It's just are contacting me for the grapefruit, right? They're not going to contact me for anything else.
Well, I mean, I get it. If my biggest complaint about LMNT is that you don't have grapefruit, that means you're doing something right.
Appreciate that. Yeah. We are just committed to trying to figure out a way to get electrolytes in people without a whole bunch of other nonsense crap. Like I saw Monster released a hydration version of Monster energy drinks now that actually have less electrolytes than their actual cans of Monster energy drink, which was just...
I know. It's so maddening to me. It is so... it makes me incensed. All the companies that sell, you think I work for LMNT, all the companies that sell things that are called electrolyte drinks. I'm like, why don't they call it a B vitamin drink? Because that's what it's got in it. It doesn't have any salt. There's no sodium in that thing.
Well, you do the B vitamin thing because B12 gives you a little energy. And so now you assume that it's working because of the wrong assumptions. So
it was interesting. I was in a Facebook group, not one of mine, the other day, and I mentioned that I use LMNT before every workout. And they were like, I tried it. It's very salty. And I'm like, that's the point. And I was like, you know what? Once you have like a couple, now I don't think they taste salty at all. They taste great. But if someone's unused to consuming any sodium, they might seem salty. And I was like, that tells you it actually is worth the money you're spending on it, because if it didn't have any sodium, you might as well drink some Kool-Aid.
Yeah, that's tough. And I do tell people all the time, some people just like more water to dilute it a little more to cut it down. But I'm hardcore salty, 10, 12, 16 ounces is about as hardcore as I get. We did have a dude on social tag us a while back who was just putting it like straight powder on his tongue.
Pixie stick style.
Yeah. And I'm like, I would not be able to taste anything for the entire rest of the day if I did that. And I could only imagine it's like the cinnamon challenge thing. I could only imagine like just how, if I aspirated any of that, how bad it would end up. So please, if you try LMNT, don't put dry powder on your tongue and then try and deal with it. It is very tart and very sweet, and it will not end.
The citric acid might hurt. With the other thing that I don't find a lot of research on it, but I get really bad altitude sickness. Mm-hmm. And it saves my bacon. I go up to Lake Tahoe on the regular, and if I double or triple my electrolyte consumption, especially sodium, I'm fine. Whereas whenever I go, I have a massive migraine for 3 days.
That's really interesting, because one of the drugs of choice in poorer countries where there's elevation issues is actually Viagra. Is it like sildenafil or whatever it is? Like it's a blood pressure medication, but that's really the bigger issue. So that's a really interesting thing to observe. I'd be real curious to figure out what's going on there. As a complete data junkie nerd, I'm curious.
Yeah, I have not like dangerously low. I have low blood pressure. Not like 105 over 70.
So you're not like having to like supplement like crazy or
no, but my mother and my brother both take medication because they'll randomly pass out.
Wow.
Which is weird. My brother randomly passed out in a shower in Morocco and had to have it's one of those great stories. Anyway, but yeah, so I appreciate lots of sodium.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay. Well, it was such a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for joining me. And I can't wait until we can see each other in person.
Sounds awesome. Bye.
All right.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Keto Life Support. Want more information? Want show notes? Want to suggest a topic? Just head over to ketolifesupport.com. That's where all that kind of thing can go on. By the way, I have a request. If you could go to your podcast host and hit subscribe, we would really, really appreciate it. And what would be even more awesome is if you could write a review. And what would be even more awesome than that is if you could write like a really flattering review. Just asking, you do you. All right. So thanks so much for joining us. I'm